الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. First and foremost, I just want to thank all the organizers for this beautiful event. And I just want everybody to focus on the last line that they mentioned. I consider myself a student. And every single one of us today, we should also be attending and listening to this gathering as a student, so we can inshallah take in as much as we can. So the program, we're going to be dividing it into two parts. The first part, inshallah, will be speaking about the life of Sheikh Saadi Shirazi. And the second part of the program will be dedicated to his poetry, giving some commentary on his poetry and what the message was behind the books he has written and the poetry he has written. So, inshallah, we'll get right into it. So, Sheikh Saadi Shirazi, he is known as Ustad-e-Sukhan. One of the many titles he was given was Ustad-e-Sukhan, meaning the master or the teacher of language. His grasp of the Farsi or Dari language was indeed quite astonishing, especially in a time where there was a lot of turbulence in the world. And we're going to speak about the historical context to what was going on during his lifetime and his era. So what is the purpose of learning about an individual? What is the purpose of learning about a person's life? So there's a few different things we have to mention. The first is the purpose, one of the many purposes, is to get inspired by this individual, especially by a person who did so much while going through so much in his life. He did not have an easy life. If anything, it was quite contrary to that. His life was full of tribulation, full of difficulty, full of hardship. So this type of individual should give us hope that no matter what we're going through in life, we can always come out, persevere to be great. Sheikh Saadi Shirazi, his life is a testimony and a testament to that. The second thing is, for the sake of implementation, we learn and read about these great individuals so we can bring some of their qualities and implement their qualities into our lives. This is the second reason. And the third, it's to bring a type of unharmful pride. A type of unharmful, what I mean by unharmful pride is this individual, he spoke and he wrote in the language of many of our mothers and fathers. And at the same time, this individual, he touched many people's hearts by the language he wrote in. So it's to feel a type of fakhr and a type of positive pride. Dare I say normal pride, because there's different types of pride, but a type of positive pride that makes you feel good about the region we live in and the language we speak. So now, before I get into his life, I just want to mention a small little discussion. I want to talk about something. Is this language he has, spoken in or written in, is it called Farsi or is it called Dari? This is a debate that will never end, depending on who you speak to. There's some people who are nationalists. They're going to always say it's called Dari. Others are always going to be saying it's considered Farsi. Whatever it is, I'm not here to, pump up any side or whatsoever, give proofs to anything. What I want to say is the general denomination of this language in the Western world, it's called Persian. This is the Western denomination, or Farsi. In the West, you never hear anybody referring to this language as Dari. In the West, you usually refer to it as Farsi or Persian. And this is referring to the area of Persia. Persia, at one point, it was quite a very giant, a very big empire. They ran a very big section of the world, spanning from Iraq all the way to the borders of China, to the north to Kazakhstan. They had a very big empire. People in this empire, obviously, even in today's day and age, this also exists. People spoke in different dialects. People spoke in different dialects. If I told you guys how many dialects of Arabic there are today, you'd be shocked. I was once talking to an Egyptian brother, and I'm trying to speak to the guy in Arabic, and he started speaking and he started saying, "Gal hada, gal hada, gal hada." in my mind, I'm like, what's this guy speaking? So I asked him, I'm like, are you speaking Arabic or are you speaking, what are you saying? Gal, it sounds like Hindi or Farsi or something. He's like, no, the Egyptian dialect of the letter Qaf, the Egyptian dialect for the letter Qaf, it's pronounced as Gaf, Ga. So I'm not saying Gal actually means Qal. And this is a small difference in dialect, right? So how I like to explain it is Dari and Farsi are two different dialects. That's all it is. Nobody should go around and try to be like Dari came first or Farsi came first. It's all rooted from the same beautiful language. But one thing I do want to mention, there's a scholar, he was born about 40 years after Sheikh Sadi passed away. His name is Ibn al-Futi. This is what he's known for. He was from the city of Maru. Maru is a modern city, is a region in modern day Iran today. So he was from this area, a Persian scholar. He was a great lyricist, a great poet as well. He has a book by the name of Majma' al-Adab fi Mu'jam al-Alqab, where he got together and he brought together the names of some of the greatest poets in his time. He mentioned in this book, and again, this was an individual who was born about 30, 40 years after the passing of Sadi, Sheikh Sadi. He mentions in his book, when speaking about Sheikh Sadi, هو يتكلم باللغة الدرية. Interesting. He actually referred to the language of Sheikh Sadi as being Dari. He didn't say يتكلم باللغة الفارسية. He said هو يتكلم باللغة الدرية. And this was a person, almost 800-900 years ago. So at that time, they had this distinction between the two languages. So it's fair to say that these languages and these dialects did exist at that time. We shouldn't try to argue to which came first and which came second. This is not, this is, if anything, this is very counterproductive. Back to the point of dialect. One of my teachers once, he was reciting a Farsi poem to me, and my teacher, one of them, he's from Punjab, the Punjab region of India. So he recited a Farsi poem to me, and I don't remember the whole poem, but all that I remember is him saying mar. And he's telling me to translate every word for word. He's like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? So I'm listening, and then I get stuck at the word mar. He's like, as khatiri mar, and so I'm listening to him, and I'm like, what is mar? I'm trying to think, what is mar? He's like, come on, this is a very easy word. Even in like normal Farsi people, or even normal everyday conversation, Farsi people speak this and use this word. And I'm thinking, I'm like, I have no idea. He said, mar, it means snake. I'm like, oh, mar, right? Sometimes just by making a letter heavy or light. In Arabic, it's called tafkhim and tarqiq. Tafkhim is to read a letter heavy. Tarqiq is to read a letter light. Sometimes one small fine different in pronunciation throws off the listener completely, like me. I couldn't figure out what mar was and what mar was until he actually told me the translation. So now, Sheikh Sadi. Sheikh Sadi, rahmatullahi alayhi, a lot of people think that his name was Sadi, but this is not the case. His name was not Sadi. Some say his name was Muslihuddin. Others say it was Musharrifuddin. Some say it was Mushrifuddin. Okay, there's a small difference in opinion to what his name was. Why? Because nobody ever called him by this. Everybody referred to him as Sadi. So throughout time, people have literally forgotten what his actual name was. And you see this with many figures in the past. One of the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His nickname, what he was known for and what he was known by to the people was Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah was his nickname, literally meaning the father of kittens. He used to take care of the cats in his area, and he gained this title and nickname. So throughout time, people forgot, or people had a difference in opinion to what his name was. Some people argued and said his name was Abdullah. Others said no, his name was Abdurrahman. Why? Because he was not known for his name, rather he was known for the nickname or the title people gave him. So Sheikh Sadi is like this as well. Nobody can say definitely 100% with certainty that his name is Muslihuddin or Musharrifuddin or Mushrifuddin, but it's along those lines. He was born in, obviously, Shiraz, which is in modern day Iran, during the Seljuk Empire, and we'll speak about the Seljuks a bit. He was born around 1187. And this is obviously after the birth, AD, right? Not according to the Islamic calendar. According to the Islamic calendar, he was born about 600 after the migration of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is a very turbulent time. The area and the time he was born into was a very, very turbulent time. This was the same time that Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, or some like to refer to him as, this was the time that he was gathering and uniting the Mongol hordes. He was gathering and bringing together the Mongol hordes. Mongolia at that time was ruled by different tribes of different areas. They were not united. So during the time he was born and brought into this world, Genghis Khan was working on uniting this very barbaric tribe, as many people know about. And we'll speak about some of the things they did, the gruesome genocides they committed. And growing up was very difficult for Sheikh Saadi. He grew up as an orphan, and he grew up very poor. His father passed away when he was very young. And something interesting he mentioned when his father passed away, he mentions this in the Gulistan. And again, we're going to speak more about his poetry during the second lecture. He mentions in the Gulistan one of the final pieces of advice his father gave him. He says, پدر چون دور عمرش منقضی گشت مرا این یک نصیحت کرد و بگذشت که شهوت آتش است از وی بپرهیز و خود بر آتش دوزخ مکن تیز در آن آتش نداری طاقت سوز و صبر آبی بر این آتش زن امروز. And this was one of the final pieces of advice his father gave him, basically saying, so whether the father mentioned it in a poetic way or not, this is Sheikh Saadi in his writing. He says, before my father passed away, he gave me a bit of nasiha and advice. And right after that advice he gave me, he left this world. He told me that desires, following desires, chasing desires in itself is a fire. It's a fire. He said, بَخُدْ بَرْ آتَشِ دُوزَخْ مَكُنْ تِز. He said, be very careful with this fire because it burns anything that comes. It burns anybody who starts to chase it. He said, as way biparhez. He said, that on atash nadari taqat sos. You don't have the ability to stay in that fire before you completely burn. Meaning the more a person chases their desires, eventually they will fall and they will crumble. And he goes, bas sabr abi barin atash tanimros. He said, use the water of forbearance against this fire. The water of patience. Be patient with your desires. Don't go and chase your desires, for these desires destroy you and will destroy you and have destroyed people in the past. This was one of his father's final pieces of advice. So as I mentioned, the Seljuks were in power during the lifetime of, or during the time when Sheikh Saadi was born. And specifically, the Seljuks were of a Turkic Persian type of descent. And they were individuals who, during the Seljuks, when they were actually in power, the Abbasid Caliphate or the Abbasid Empire still had their base in Baghdad. So the Emir, Al-Mu'tasim Billah, he was the Emir of the Abbasid Empire at that time. The Abbasids had no, you can say, pull or drag when it came to the powers of the world. They were very close to being depleted and destroyed. The Seljuks were running the empire on their behalf. So the Abbasids were there, but by name in Baghdad. Faris, or Persia, the area of Persia, was ruled by the Zangi family. Again, people of Turkish descent. The Zangi family, they were governors of that time. And after Sheikh Saadi's father passed away, the governor of Shiraz, or some say he was the governor of Persia in itself, his name was Sa'd, the son of Zangi. He actually took Sheikh Saadi in. He took care of him. He sent him to school. He would pay for his clothing, pay for whatever it was. The ruler at that time was there for him. His name was Sa'd ibn Zangi. And in his Bustan, Sheikh Saadi actually has a few very long poems about the Zangi family. Sa'd, his son Abu Bakr, he praises them in depth in his Bustan. So After he completed his studies in Shiraz, he went to you can say the hub of learning at that time. He went to Baghdad. So Baghdad at that time was the metropolitan of the world. It was the center point of knowledge when it came to connecting the east, the west, the north. Everybody, all the you can say that the trade caravans and so forth, they would meet in Baghdad, and from Baghdad they would go to their destinations. And at the same time, Baghdad was home to one of the greatest, if not the greatest university in the medieval era. Some actually call it the greatest university at that time, called the Madrasatun Nizamiyah. Al-Madrasatun Nizamiyah, or the Nizami University. The Nizami University was a branch of universities that existed within the Abbasid Empire. They had branches in Syria, in Baghdad, in different cities of Iraq, such as Basra and so forth, in Balkh and so forth. So Sheikh Saadi went to the Nizami Madrasa to study the sacred sciences. He actually studied there for a good 20 years, where he studied tafsir, hadith, fiqh, philosophy. He was a scholar. He was a very great scholar of these sciences. And one thing that's quite interesting is the tuition. The tuition at that time of all the Nizami universities were free. They were completely free. If only universities in today's day and age were free, we'd be saving a lot of money. But this was madrasas at that time, right? Universities at that time. And the Madrasat al-Nizamiyah, it was home to many great scholars. Not only Sheikh Saadi. You had the likes of Imam Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Ghazali, he is one of the greatest Islamic scholars ever. He revolutionized philosophy. He revolutionized, you can say, this concept of tazkiyah, or inner purity. What he did was he completely dismantled Greek philosophy, and he actually wrote a book, his book, the Ihya Ulumuddin, where he speaks about the fallacy of Greek philosophy and how it's just complete rubbish. And based all the philosophy we have today, all the Islamic philosophers who came after him based their writing on Imam Ghazali. So Imam Ghazali was a graduate of the Nizami University. He was also a professor upon graduation as well. So the Nizami University had a very reputable name. As I mentioned, he studied there for 20 years, Sheikh Saadi. And one of his teachers, he makes reference to him in the Gulistan. His name is, or he's known as Ibn al-Jawzi. He refers to him as Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi was a great Hanbali scholar at that time, a Hanbali fiqh scholar. And he refers to him as Sheikh Ajallim. Sheikh Ajallim, my very honorable, or my noble mentor. We're going to speak about mentorship, inshallah, in the future, and maybe if we have time, inshallah, we'll speak about one of these poems that a contemporary in today's day and age wrote about this concept of mentorship. So Ibn al-Jawzi was his mentor when it came to seeking advice and making mashwara, as they say, or making decisions. He always went to Ibn al-Jawzi, who was a professor at the Nizami University. So now, this is where things become very difficult and turbulent. Sheikh Saadi hears that the Mongols were coming from the east. The Mongols, at this time, they destroyed and pillaged Balkh, which is in modern-day Afghanistan. They destroyed and pillaged cities such as Herat as well, which is in modern-day Afghanistan. It's actually mentioned, Ibn Kathir, who is an individual, a great scholar, a great historian, a great mufassir, and an exegete of the Quran. He was born about 100 years after Sheikh Saadi, around 1300 AD. He mentions that the amount of people that were killed in Herat and Balkh put together exceeded over 2 million. 2 million people were killed in Herat and Balkh by the Mongols, by, at this time, the ruler Genghis Khan. And they spared nobody. They were literally barbaric. It's even mentioned, Ibn Kathir mentions that they even killed the animals, the stray cats and dogs. They left none of them alive. Very barbaric people who savaged and destroyed many cities at that time. And unfortunately, Baghdad was also one of these cities. So before Genghis Khan, or at this time, Genghis Khan passed away, one of his successors, his name was Hulaku Khan. He was the one in charge of the Mongol hordes at that time coming towards the west. By the time they reached Baghdad, Sheikh Saadi rahmatullahi alayhi left. he heard about this great trial and this great army coming from the east, so he ran away. And he actually mentions in his Bostan, he actually he writes in great detail about how Baghdad was destroyed and how heartbroken he was. Baghdad was very beloved to him because he spent 20 years there. And his teacher, actually, Ibn al-Jawzi, his mentor, who I mentioned, he passed away in that attack of the Mongols in Baghdad. So Ibn Kathir, rahmatullahi alayhi, mentions just in Baghdad, it is not known because many people were thrown into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It is not known exactly how many people were killed during this time, but it's anywhere between 200,000 to 800,000 people just in the city of Baghdad. Ibn Kathir mentions that the Tigris River, it turned red by the amount of people thrown into it. And at the same time, the Tigris River, it turned black because of the amount of books thrown into it. The Mongols were not in need of books. They were illiterate people. They didn't care about, books, writing, this and that. They threw everything into the Tigris. And many books were lost at that time. Many books were lost at that time. So Ibn Kathir rahmatullahi alayhi mentions, مَا زَالَ السَّيْفِ يَقْتُلُ أَهْلَهَا 40 يَوْمًا. For 40 days, and this is mentioned in the book of history known as Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya by Ibn Kathir. He says that for 40 days, the Mongols destroyed and just pillaged and murdered the people of Baghdad. For 40 days, non-stop, they slaughtered and slaughtered and slaughtered people. Destroying everything, every masjid, every building, burning everything, killing children, the elderly, women, the dogs, the cats, everything. Everything was destroyed. So much so that Ibn Kathir mentions that وَالْقَتْلَ فِي الطُّرُقَاتِ. So many people were killed that there was nobody there to bury these people. You would see bodies on the pathways. فِي الطُّرُقَاتِ. They were everywhere. وَقَدْ سَقَطَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَطَرِ. These bodies were there for so long that these bodies began to rot. These bodies began to rot because rain started falling on top of it and nobody was there to clean up the city, or you can say bury these people. So he goes and he says, فَتَغَيَّرَتْ صُوَرُهُمْ وَأَنْتَتَتْ مِنْ جَيْفِهِمْ الْبَلَدِ وَتَغَيَّرَ الْهَوَاءِ. So much so that these bodies, so many people were killed that the weather began to change. The oxygen became too toxic to inhale. Ajib. Then he goes and he says, فَحَصَلَ بِسَبَبِهِ الْوَبَاءَ الشَّدِيدِ. Great epidemics actually arose because of the amount of people killed in Baghdad and because of the amount of people rotting in Baghdad. People were just everywhere. And this is Ibn Kathir writing this. Ibn Kathir at this time, he was in Damascus. He wasn't even in Iraq. So what did he say? He says, فَمَاتَ خَلْقٌ كَثِيرٌ مِنْ تَغَيُّرِ الْجَوِّ وَفَسَادِ الرِّيحِ. He says, وَسَرَى فِي الْهَوَى إِلَى بِلَادِ الشَّامِ. This, you can say, toxic weather or this toxic oxygen, it became so much that it got its way to Syria. It got its way to Syria to a point where even the people in Syria were now dying by inhaling this oxygen and these toxins coming from Baghdad and Iraq. So many people, point being, many people were killed. And this is Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah mentioning this. After this, so Sheikh Sa'di, what happened was that he began to travel for 30 years. For about 30 years, he began to travel the Muslim world. He lived a nomadic life. He traveled to Asia, the Middle East, to North Africa. And why and how this is known, it's because he mentions this in his poetry. That one day I was in Marrakesh, one day I was in Ba'labaka, one day I was here, one day I was on the borders of Sin and India. He mentions these different stories within his poetry. And he spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, a nomadic life with different caravans, meeting different types of people, meeting ex-kings who were destroyed, whose kingdoms were destroyed by the Mongols, taking their wisdom and learning from these types of individuals. He even got captured by crusaders. He was jailed for 7 years. It's mentioned in the Bostan that he was jailed for about 7 years by the crusaders, where a group of Muslims finally passed by and they paid for all the Muslims' bail that were in the dungeons of these crusaders. So he lived a very difficult life, full of hardship. But one thing that's beautiful, And why I say it's beautiful is because Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah, he actually mentions this in his book as well. He gives a story of a king, and he was with this king traveling, and they were on a boat. And there was an individual on this boat who just kept screaming. It was his first time in the middle of the ocean. He was just going crazy, screaming. He was very uncomfortable being in the middle of the ocean on this boat. So he started screaming, going crazy. The king was getting very annoyed. He said, "Can somebody please make this person be quiet? Can somebody please make this guy be quiet?" So Sheikh Sa'di was there, and he said, "Throw him in the water. Let him drown a bit, and then pull him out. And once he's regained his breath, throw him back in the water. Do this a few times and you'll see what happens." So they took his advice. They threw him in the water. He drowned a bit. They let him regain his breath, threw him back in the water, drowned a bit, regained his breath, threw him back. So after the third or fourth time, they saw this individual. He was sitting in the corner of the boat, very quiet and not saying a word. The king was shocked. He said, "What is this? What is this sorcery? Like a few minutes ago, he was screaming, going crazy. Now he's not making any sound, any noise whatsoever. What happened?" Well, Sheikh Sa'di, he says something beautiful. He says, "Qadr afiyat kase danad ke ba musibat giriftar ayat." Qadr afiyat kase danad ke ba musibat giriftar ayat. Only those people who have been afflicted with the trials of life really know what afiyah, really know what a good and peaceful life is. This person, he experienced tribulation and hardship. Now he knows what a good life really is once he's on the boat. Now he knows where his safety actually is, right? So Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah, his life really did exemplify this based on the different things he went through. So he's began his two most famous books, the Bustan, the flower garden, or the rose garden, and the Gulistan, the rose garden, and the Bustan, the orchard, and the Gulistan, the rose garden. He began writing these two books around the year 1250. Some say that he completed writing the Bustan at 1257 and the Gulistan at 1258 AD. It's not known exactly, but these are the dates people have given. So upon arriving after 30 years, upon arriving to Shiraz, he was greeted with a lot of, he was greeted in a very, very happily. People were very happy to see him after a very long time. So it's mentioned that they threw out, you can say, the red carpet for him. People came to the outskirts of the city just to wish him a warm welcome back to his home city and hometown of Shiraz. So at this time, the ruler, as I mentioned before, the ruler of Shiraz before was Sa'd ibn Zangi. The ruler of Shiraz now, after 30, 40 years of him traveling and so forth, was the son of Sa'd. His son's name was Abu Bakr ibn Sa'd. Abu Bakr, the son of Sa'd. So he also writes a very long poem praising Abu Bakr as well in his Bustan. So now the question comes, where did this title of Sa'di come from? So it's mentioned, and he actually mentions this in his Bustan as well, that he gave himself this takhallus, you can say, or this nickname in gratitude and in honor of Sa'd ibn Zangi, the ruler of Shiraz when he was a child. Because this individual took care of him when his father wasn't there. When his father passed away, Sa'd ibn Zangi took him into his care, treated him, paid for his education and so forth. And because of that, that was the means of him traveling to Baghdad and pursuing further studies as well. So because of this, he called himself, or he named himself Sa'di, referring to Sa'd ibn Zangi, the ruler of Shiraz at that time. And you see this sometimes, it's quite interesting. Some of these individuals and figures, they have such a great impact on the world that even hundreds of years after, people are still looking at them as great figures, and people you'd never think to even know about these individuals having an impact on even these types of people as well. So everybody knows who Jay-Z and Beyonce is, right? Jay-Z and Beyonce, they have 3 kids. And this is something kind of on topic, but at the same time off topic as well. Jay-Z and Beyonce, they are, and this is not me listening to their interview. One of my, a very great scholar in the United States, his name is Firaydun Mujaddidi. He mentioned this. He said that Jay-Z and Beyonce, they have 3 kids. And these two, Jay-Z and Beyonce, they are in love with Rumi. They are in love with Maulana, to a point that they named one of their kids Rumi. This is Jay-Z and Beyonce. And the other kid, the other child, they named her Sir, S-I-R, spelled sir, literally. So one day they were interviewed. They said, "What's the wisdom behind naming your child Sir? I mean, isn't that kind of weird? Why would you name him Sir?" And the answer they gave, they said, it's not Sir, it's Sir, coming from the word that Maulana Rumi always used many times in his Mathnawi. Sir meaning secrecy, the secrets of loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Loving God. So he said, that's why we named the child Sir, Rumi, because Rumi obviously, and Sir coming from the word he has used many times in his book. It's not Sir, it's Sir, get it right. And this is Jay-Z and Beyonce. And you even have people, especially around the 18th and 19th century, a lot of French people, because his book, his Gulistan and Bostan, was translated to almost 20-30 languages, including French, including English, Russian, in today's day and age, Urdu, Hindi. It's translated in almost every language today. So there's a lot of people, French people especially, they have named their children Saadi because of the impact Sheikh Saadi had with his poetry in France at that time, in the 18th and 19th century. One of the governors of Paris, actually, his name was Saadi. Quite interesting. This is a person born and raised in France, yet their name is going back to a great scholar of the Seljuk Empire, the Seljuk dynasty. From the time he began writing his poetry, literally from the time he began writing his poetry, it touched the hearts of many. Right when his Bostan and Gulistan were published and completed, it was distributed throughout the entire Persian Empire, or the entire state of Persia at that time. So many children were studying it. Many people heard about him, heard about his popularity, heard about his poetry, to a point where there's a traveler known by Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta, he is known as one of the greatest travelers of the ever. Some say he's a greater traveler than what's it called? What's the individual's name? Marco Polo. There you go. Some say he was a greater traveler than Marco Polo himself. He traveled extensively. China, North Africa, Anatolia, you name it, he's been there. And he was, everything that he experienced, he wrote it down. He had a book by the name of Rihla, or the name is not Rihla, but the book's title is Rihla to Ibn Battuta, the journey or the memoirs of Ibn Battuta. The book of the book's name itself is Tuhfatun Nadhar fi Gharaib al-Amsar. So he wrote this book as a memoir to his long journeys and so forth. So he actually mentions that one day he was in China. He was in China, and he was amongst a group of Chinese people. They were sitting down and they were singing. They were singing different things with musical instruments, and they were reciting a poem. And Ibn Battuta says that I did not know what language this poem was, so I wrote the whole thing in Arabic, because that's the language I spoke. That's the language he spoke. Lo and behold, this poem that these people were writing or were reciting in China, it was a poem of Sheikh Saadi. And Ibn Battuta, he was born around 1300 AD, 1300 after death. And this is not that far from the time when Sheikh Saadi passed away. Sheikh Saadi passed away around 1290. 10 years later, his poetry is being recited in China. It's ajib. I mean, the impact this individual had in such a short amount of time. 10 years after his death, people are already reciting his poetry in a very different environment. And this brings, this reminds me of something I went through when I was visiting Afghanistan back in 2010. Sometimes the most astonishing things you hear, things you would never even imagine, people are exposed to. So I was in Kabul I remember I was by myself. I was going to my uncle's house, I believe. I don't remember where I was going exactly, but I remember the incident so vividly. I sat inside a taxi. I called a taxi and I sat inside the taxi, and there was an individual who was listening to Tupac. An individual literally listening to Tupac, the very famous rapper. I'm just shocked. I'm like, Tupac in Afghanistan? Anyways, I made nothing of it. At that time, people were listening to a lot of Western music. I'm like, whatever, maybe he found his music appealing and he started listening to it. This guy, I guess, based on my broken Farsi, he figured out that I'm not from there. I told him I'm from Canada and so forth. Then he started quizzing me. He's like, Shunidi ki Tupac kushta? He's like, Ki fikri mein ki kushta? Biggie or, I swear this is what he said, Biggie or Suge Knight? I was just blown away. I'm like, Biggie? And I'm like, where did you hear this from? He's like, ma kulle history she khondum, kulle tarikh Tupac khondum. Then he started giving me his opinion. He's like, ma fikri mein karam ki Biggie kushtish. Suge Knight na mein torasta pagoshish. I'm like, I mean, sometimes literally you would never think that people would reach those parts of the globe, but Sheikh Saadi is a testament to that. Farsi being recited in China and Tupac being studied in Afghanistan. Quite an interesting thing I went through. So inshallah ta'ala, I didn't want to prolong this first part too long because the second part, inshallah, it's going to be quite extensive and quite comprehensive. So Sheikh Saadi rahmatullahi alayh, he passed away around the year 1290 in Shiraz. So they've actually, whether that's the actual resting place of his or not, the exact location, they've made a shrine for him actually in Shiraz, and that is where he rests to this day, 1290. So inshallah ta'ala, we have concluded the first part of the lecture. So we'll take a short, maybe 10-15 minute break, a nice long break, because the next lecture might be a little longer because we're going to be speaking extensively about his poetry and giving some commentary on that. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll conclude with a little break, and we'll continue in a few minutes, inshallah ta'ala.